Hi, everybody. Dan Illman here with the DRF Preakness Webinar, and I am absolutely pleased to be with David Aragona because without a doubt, David's one of the finest handicappers out there. You can catch David and his colleague, Craig Milkowski, on the Timeform podcasts every Tuesday and Friday on DRF TV. It's some of the most informative listening that you can have. I always learn something. Take a pen and paper, write some stuff down. You will learn stuff from the Timeform US podcasts. David, thanks so much for taking the time out to do this Preakness webinar. I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. It's Preakness Week is always exciting, and you're the Maryland guru, so I'm excited to pick your brain about it. And we don't get to work directly too much together, so I'm excited to talk about these races with you.
We'll talk about the the pick six races, 8 through the Preakness, of course. We'll get a little business out of the way. You know, if you're going to bet the Preakness, why don't you try DRF bets? You get a $250 deposit match bonus, a $10 free bet, and more importantly, free access to Formulator past performances, the gold standard in horse racing past performance information. Bet with confidence with DRF bets, drf.com/bet. Let's kick things off with race number 8. It's the Grade 2 dinner party. We'll, of course, take your questions after we complete the analysis of the Preakness. And in the dinner party, we've got a horse that's going to be a heavy favorite, and it's Set Piece. And Set Piece's, accomplishments are very obvious on paper. But at the end of the day, the question is this: is there enough pace to set up Set Piece?
Yeah, there really isn't a whole lot of pace in this race at all. If you're a fan of the Timeform US pace projector, this is one that gets that no pace designation, and there's just no confirmed front runner in this field. And that's not good for Set Piece. He's not a horse that has much early speed. And I do think Set Piece is a horse that has a lot of natural ability. I would say in terms of accomplishments, he's a little bit light on those, just given the talent that I think he possesses. And his last couple of races kind of speak to that unfulfilled potential. He's tried Grade 1 company in each of those starts, and he looked like he had a shot at it both times in the Maker's Mark and last year in the Woodbine Mile. Just wasn't able to produce that stretch kick that sometimes is so impressive against weaker company. So maybe this is the level that Set Piece needs, dropping back into this Grade 2 event. But like you said, with there not being a lot of pace in this race, I didn't want to take that short a price on him. I think the other horse that is dropping out of the Maker's Mark, the number 6, Atone, also is one that merits a lot of respect in this race. He's got better tactical speed than Set Piece does, so I would anticipate he could potentially be the early leader in this race, if not stalking outside of a horse like English Bee. So that could prove to be the right trip in this kind of race. And I thought he deceptively ran pretty well in the Maker's Mark. A lot of the late runs were done on the outside part of the course at Keeneland. He was trying to battle on the inside. So I think that he ran well that day. In some ways, I view him as the one that they have to catch. But if I was going to try to beat those two with one price horse, the one that I could try to make a case for was the number 4, Beacon Hill, a horse that I thought was pretty progressive last year, moved through his allowance conditions, tried stakes company, but probably going too far in the point of entry. And I thought his return at Keeneland was pretty nice. He got a wide trip, just missed by a nose, and he would have to take a step forward to beat those two favorites, but I think he's one that has some upside.
Beacon Hill has no chance, David, because I like him as well. And I really like him in this race. I'd like to bet him. I think he's going to be a fair price. I think he has more tactical speed than some of the others in this race. And I think tactical speed is going to be at a premium. Like you, I think Atone is the one to catch. And off his race in the Maker's Mark, he had a very good trip in that race, but he also ran very well first-time blinkers, earned a triple-digit buyer for the first time. He might be the one to catch and the one to beat considering the pace scenario. I want to talk a little bit about Set Piece's last race, the Maker's Mark. He has the built-in excuse, of course. It was his first race off a layoff. Did you notice, and you're a very keen trip handicapper, you watch your horses to watch every Wednesday on DRF TV. Did you notice that he was very fresh in that race, that he was pulling? Do you think that maybe sapped his stretch kick a little bit?
Yeah, it's a race that didn't feature that much pace. They really flew home that final quarter mile in 22 and change. So to produce that kick, you really need your horse to relax in the early stages. You can kind of see on the backstretch watching this replay, he was just a little bit too handy, or he was keen moving down the backstretch, just a little more forward than I think Ferrantru wanted him. He ended up making a move that was a little bit too soon, and he didn't have that late kick that the others were able to produce in the final quarter mile of this race. So that worked against him, but he's a horse that I've seen do that that before, typically farther back in the pack, so they're able to get him covered up, unlike when they weren't able to do last time. So we'll see how that works out. With not a lot of pace in this race, I would be concerned that could happen again. And he's just not a horse that I trust to win given the pace situation. But I acknowledge he's arguably the most talented runner in this field.
I don't really have much more to add about Beacon Hill. Let's talk a little bit about his point of entry. They stretched him all the way out to 1.5 miles, and that seemed like a legitimate pace that he was pressing that day. He was pressing the favorite, who isn't a great shakes by any means, but still was the favorite in that race. Beacon Hill got the better of that horse turning into the stretch, and he fought off Sham Rocket, who was in very good form at the time. I thought that was a promising effort, considering he was on the pace at a very demanding distance. And his last race at Keeneland, I think, shows that he's come back good as a 5-year-old. I think he's versatile from a distance standpoint. What did you think of this race, the point of entry at 1.5 miles? Do you think that he found his niche going longer, or do you think he has the versatility to adapt to just about anything?
Yeah, I actually liked him in this race last year, and not so much because I thought he was going to be a 1.5 mile horse. I just really liked the way he was improving coming into it. And the horse that did beat him this day, Shamrock, and I guess it's a slight negative that he got run down by that horse, because Shamrock's not a horse that loves to win races, but Beacon Hill probably was just exposed going a little bit too far that time. And like you said, I was encouraged by that return race at Keeneland last time. That same grit and determination that he showed in the stretch of the point of entry, I thought we saw when he was closing down the center of the track, because a horse kind of swerved in front of him in upper stretch of that Keeneland race, and he had to go around that horse, and seemed like he re-engaged after that and made a really good late run at the winner, Camp Hope, who I think is a nice horse in his own right. So I do think Beacon Hill has to take another step forward, but like you were saying, I think he has a right to do so because he's the one coming into this race with upside. Just one more horse before we move on that I would want to mention is the number 1, Tango Tango Tango. I'm not sure that he's as good as Beacon Hill, but kind of in that same vein. He's a horse that is a 4-year-old. He's got some upside. He's come back winning both of his starts so far this year. This is a big step up in class for him, but he's another horse that in the past has shown tactical speed on occasion. So I wouldn't be surprised if Tyler Gaffalione gets a bit aggressive with him from the inside post.
And the good news is everyone now knows that the microphone is working in the press box at Pimlico. So we've kicked off the Rainbow Pick 6. We both might take a little bit of a flyer with Beacon Hill over set piece, but Atone certainly a dangerous contender, expected to make the lead. And if you get knocked out of the Pick 6, the great news is next. You have a Pick 5. And at Pimlico and at the Maryland Jockey Club, it's a 12% low takeout, which you should take into consideration when playing any wager. The Chick Lang, unlike the previous race, the Dinner Party, features a ton of early speed, at least on paper. And I can understand anyone that wants to fade Cogburn, the number 1, watching the last race, The Bachelor. Cogburn is 3-5 that day. Cogburn does not go very fast on the lead, and he is simply outrun in the final 16th of a mile by Wayland Springs, who is an Arkansas bred trying open company for the first time. I, on the other hand, was really taken by Cogburn's races 2 and 3 starts back. To me, he just looked like a horse with a lot of potential. I have a feeling that he has to be on ascend from the inside post. When I talked to Brett Brinkman earlier this week, he said he's playing the break with Old Homestead, which makes me think he might sit a little bit. I'm not sure how good Cogburn is. Visually impressive against weaker competition, 2 and 3 starts back. Disappointing loss last time, and more importantly, a low price. This race concerns me a little bit. I'm interested in Little Vic, the number 9. I'm curious as to your thoughts, because I think this horse has always been a sprinter. They added in their heads that Little Vic wanted to go 2 turns. He faced tough competition in both of his routes. It didn't work out. He romped last time out at Monmouth, and I like that they're wheeling him back on short notice.
Yeah, that says that he probably came out of the race in good order. It is a quick turnaround for him, though, and that's a career best effort that he's coming off. The Timeform US speed figure for that race is very high, a 117. So that makes him the fastest horse in the race on those numbers, and Beyer has it pretty close as well. So I think based on that last effort, Little Vic is a contender here. And I guess, if there is going to be a lot of speed going to the inside, he is drawn outside all of them. So Paco Lopez would have that option to sit and stalk if he wanted to. It's a real class test for him. He was one of the ones I was considering. I would say Steve Asmussen has a pretty strong hand in this race, because he has what I think might be the speed of the speed in Cogburn, breaking from the inside. And he also has a horse that I'm somewhat interested in that could play out as a closer in this race, and that's the number 6, Chasing Time. And I'd be more interested in Chasing Time at the bigger price. I don't know if he's quite this good, but this feels like the kind of race that does have collapse written on it, just given the amount of speed signed on to the horses that seemingly have to get sent forward. And Chasing Time has by far the highest time form US late pace rating in the field. That's mostly due to the fact that he's been finishing decently in some route races. But watching him run, especially early in his career, I never got the sense that he really wanted to go 2 turns. I know he was visually impressive winning that first 2-turn attempt going a mile back in January, but that was kind of a weak field, slow pace. I thought he had everything go his way that day. I really think the turn back is going to work well for this horse. He's probably going to have to rally from last because everybody in this field is faster than him early. But I just think that maybe he's one that could get somewhat overlooked with the lower speed figures. I'm not against Cogburn. I'm probably a little bit more bullish on his chances than maybe you sound. I liked his last race because the one thing that I was not sure about with this horse is when he got headed in his debut at Saratoga, he just threw in the towel and quit as soon as the horse kind of ranged up alongside of him. And in those 2 subsequent victories, he had won easily, gotten to the lead by a couple lengths and drew off. And what I liked last time in The Bachelor is that a horse challenged him, Wayland Springs, and he actually dug in and tried to fend that horse off, didn't ultimately do it, but he really battled gamely to the wire. So that gave me the confidence that Cogburn can withstand a more heated pace situation and turn some horses away. So I think he's the one to catch in this race. I'm just kind of hoping the other Asmussen is able to do it at a bigger price.
And I know I sounded bearish on Cogburn's chances. I actually picked him in the paper. I like everything you said about his last race, The Bachelor. I just have to mention, there are question marks at his short price. I do think if he runs to the talent level that he's shown, he's going to be dangerous in this race. We have to talk about Wayland Springs, the horse that beat him last time out. I was talking to John Ortiz, and maybe this is just trainer speak, where he said, well, this horse is just a big horse that needed a couple of races to figure things out. Well, figure things out he did. He won his last 3, and he looked like he wasn't going to go by Cogburn, and then he just hopped back to his left lead the last 70 yards. And I guess that gave him the necessary energy burst. I guess it showed that they weren't going very fast, that he was that close to the pace, because Cogburn is a real blazer out of there. It's nice to know that he can sit off. I think he might drift a little bit off the 4-1 morning line, even with the win over Cogburn on the PPs.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what to do with him. If it was just based on his last race, he's a major contender in here, but the improvement with this horse has been so sudden that you wonder if he's going to react badly to that race. I'm not a big proponent of the bounce theory, but I mean, his other races just don't really make him a contender in here. So do you really want to base your opinion on one number, one race? It was the most recent one. I liked his last race as well. He was game to get by that horse who was digging in to try to fend him off. And he's got that ability to stalk and pounce, whereas others in this race don't really seem to have that versatility. So I'm not going to be shocked when he runs well. He's one that I would definitely use here because the horse that I would want to fade is the number 5 Old Homestead. He just had everything go his way last time in that Lafayette. That race was totally dominated towards the front end, a merry-go-round affair, and I just don't see how he's going to get the same setup here.
A great opportunity to talk about the time form US pace figures when discussing Old Homestead. You look at his PPs in the DRF, you see that the horse is flawless. He's never been headed, and you might think he is just some sort of speedball. But when you look at time form US's pace figs for the Lafayette, you understand what David is talking about. Blue coated bars. It was a 1-2 race all the way around the track, as David said, and Old Homestead's going to be facing the toughest test of his career, perhaps from a quality standpoint, as well as the toughest pace situation. At 2-1, I think that's a very difficult proposition to take, and I agree with you that I would probably be fading him in most of my bets. Chasing Time is a very interesting closer, to be sure. I think he's going to take a little bit of money. I think people love turnbacks in races where there's supposedly a plethora of early speed, but Steve Asmussen's won this race already 4 times. He'll look for a 5-pack in the Chick Lang. James W. Murphy is up next. We're going a mile on the turf. Kicks off a 50-cent pick 4. You look at this race, and Ready to Perform is an intriguing horse. He's 5-2 on the morning line. He won a very weak edition of the Laurel Futurity 2 starts back, and he did it with an absolutely golden pace situation where you had not great horses going very fast on the lead, and Ready to Perform ran right by them. And based on that, he was favored in the Golden Mile at Del Mar last time out, and boy, he didn't run well at all.
Yeah, this horse was definitely a little bit overrated off that Laurel Futurity last year. I know that they were even trying to get into the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf with this horse. I would imagine that wouldn't have turned out too well. But Yeah, there is pace in this race as well. So it's possible that he could get the right setup once again. But I do wonder if he's going to be overbet based on that impressive victory last year at Laurel. He at 5-2, I'm not sure that I'd be that enticed by him because I do think he's got to step forward a little bit. And when he got that class test at Del Mar last time, he really just didn't produce any sort of kick. It's not like that was a crawling pace up front. He just didn't really have much finish that day. He could do better off the layoff, now returning as a 3-year-old, just coming out of the barn that he's in, Brad Cox. These horses always take money. So I kind of wanted to find some better value if it was possible. The problem with this race is, as you were saying, some of these horses that run in these stakes races in Maryland, there are contenders and then there are the pretenders. And there are a lot of pretenders in this race. And I can kind of narrow it down to 4 major players. The horse that I'm most curious about that maybe you can shed some light on, because you typically know a little bit more about what's going on in these races, is the number 10 Joe, and why they're putting this horse back on the turf. There are a couple of horses that have better dirt form in this race, both him and Shake 'em Loose. And I'm just curious why they're running here as opposed to a race like the Sir Barton.
Here's Joe's story. After he won the Tessio last time out, he had an automatic entry into the Preakness. The problem was he was not Triple Crown nominated, and as we know, with Creative Minister, it would cost $150,000 to supplement. I talked to Michael Trombett, and he actually said the connections were game, but they looked at his figures and they said, he's really not a contender in the Preakness. We're not going to run him there. Now, I'm not sure if he's eligible for the Sir Barton simply because he's won a stakes race. I'm not sure if the Sir Barton's a race restricted to horses that have not won a stake. I have a feeling Joe's running here because you got to run him somewhere. And I think they ran him in his debut on the turf because he had turf pedigree. They thought he could handle the surface. He is a very big, powerful horse. Distance will not be an issue for him. He's also on the green side. He is also way too short a price for me on the morning line. And I want nothing to do with Joe in this spot because I really think he's a dirt horse. And I think he's here because the Preakness just seems out, shooting for the moon, and he's not eligible for the Sir Barton. And there's another dirt horse in this race, Shake 'em Loose, who's won 2 stakes races for Rudy Sanchez Salomon, who ran once on the turf and was just absolutely terrible. He's in here. He might actually take some money based on his company lines. I want nothing to do with him as well.
Yeah, I kind of forgotten that the Sir Barton's a restricted race, so that makes sense. Yeah, I definitely like Joe more than Shake 'em Loose. At least Joe has that prior turf race that was okay, going too short. He clearly is a horse that wants to go longer than the 5.5 furlongs, and he has one of those pedigrees that can go either way. By declaration of war, and his best half sibling was a mare named Irony of Reality, who was a much better turf synthetic horse. So, even though he showed good dirt form, Joe strikes me as the kind of horse, just watching him run, that can go between surfaces if they want to. It's just like you were saying, he's going to get bet off dirt races, so he's probably bad value in this race. So I don't like to take horses like that at short prices. Yeah, the other horse that's kind of obvious on paper is the number 7 Riot House. He did appear to stretch out, to improve when they stretched him out to 2 turns. And I guess that's not a big surprise because his damn Tutti Paese was a horse that wanted to go longer. She was a stakes quality runner. And it seems like this guy has really done well since they went 2 turns with him at Gulfstream. It's just those Gulfstream turf races, it feels like they were a little bit weaker in general this winter than past seasons. And the 2 that he's coming out of, those were not the strongest fields overall. So I feel like maybe he looks better on speed figures than he actually is. I'm not going to be shocked when he does well in this race. I was trying to find a horse that I could make at a bigger price. And the one that I could come up with, the only one, was the number 2 Local Motive, a horse that ran okay on the turf as a 2-year-old compared to his surrounding form at that time. And it just feels like he's improved a lot overall as a racehorse since then. And I like that he was able to stretch out in his last 2 starts. Divining Rod has had some success in Maryland. I know not as much turf success as dirt success, but Divining Rod kind of strikes me as a sire that might get turf runners. So I think Local Motive is a bit interesting. And of the 4 horses that we kind of focused on, he's the one that is sure to be the biggest price.
I'm very happy that you mentioned Divining Rod because I think he fits the profile of a hidden turf stallion. His Damn Precious Kitten, I believe, was a Grade 1 winner on the turf, and she's a full sister to Kitten's Joy, who, of course, is a turf champion and a champion turf stallion. I expect Divining Rod to get good turf horses down the road. He's only had limited opportunities. Locomotive, as you mentioned, has shown his prowess on the turf, and I think that the key for him in this race is this. He's getting a cut back to a mile. And when I've talked to John Salzman about Locomotive in the past, he was concerned about the 1.1 in the private terms last time out. Also that day, I thought you wanted to be outside. And Locomotive for a lot of that race was down on the rail and might have been up against the bias, and he still ran pretty well. I think he is in very good form in this race. Getting back to Joe real quick, I'm not even sure if Trombetta knows if he can run on the turf. He had a turf work scheduled over the weekend. There's been a lot of rain in the Maryland area. He didn't get the turf work in. So I think he's still wondering whether Joe can do it. And Joe is going to take money. We talked about the Sir Barton. It's up next. $100,000 is the purse. And Ethereal Road is the big name in this race, perhaps not for anything he's done on the racetrack, but because his scratch caused all the chaos at Churchill Downs 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, he was kind of the key factor in all of that taking place, with him coming out and allowing Rich Strike to get into the race as that also eligible runner, number 21. Yeah, I believe the story was that he wasn't training up to satisfaction and Lucas didn't want to run him based on an unsatisfactory workout. So here he is showing up 2 weeks later in the Sir Barton, and just generally, this is a much more appropriate spot for Ethereal Road. He didn't really belong in the Derby. He had kind of been beaten by some other 3-year-olds pretty soundly in a few of those higher profile Derby preps. So I think this is a good spot for Ethereal Road. There's plenty of pace in this race, and he's a horse that does do his best running from off the pace. And watching his trip last time to Lexington, it felt like he got a bit too keen moving down the backstretch under Victor Espinoza. He was kind of between and behind horses, and it looked like he wanted to go, and Espinoza was trying to rein him in. And when he finally got out into the clear, he just didn't produce the kick that you were expecting him to. He just finished up mildly to be fourth in that race. I wish he had taken that speed figure step forward that you were hoping you'd see from him after the Rebel, even after that impressive debut maiden victory. He just has kind of hit a plateau from a buyer standpoint, that even if you look at the time form US numbers, but this is an appropriate spot for him. I'm not against him in this race. I kind of do view him as the horse to beat.
I think he is the horse to beat, especially considering the pace scenario, but I still wonder how good he is, and I have a feeling he's going to get bet along with the number 5 B Dog, who's stretching out off a win that just looks like an anomaly. Maybe it was the blinkers off. He just happened to catch the right field and the right setup. I thought at Keeneland during that 92 buyer speed figure, maybe he's turned it all around, but I don't really want anything to do with him. My day is really contingent on the number 6, Mr. Jefferson, a horse that I like a lot in this race. And I want to go back to his Remsen, and I'm curious to your thoughts because I think he ran a lot better than it looks in that race. He was very, very wide. He made a menacing move on the turn. He got to within range of some pretty good horses. And then he just couldn't finish with Mo Donegal and Zandon. There's nothing to be ashamed of that performance. Trombetta tells me that this horse is a bleeder. He needs Lasix. He caught wet tracks in his 2 subsequent starts in New York. He didn't run well in any of them. I didn't think he handled the surface, especially in the withers. In the Tessio last time out, he ran his race. He was traveling very sweetly on the second turn. He got the split in the stretch, and Joe just outfinished him. Maybe Joe's a better horse than Mr. Jefferson is, but I think it was good to see Mr. Jefferson get back on the beam, and he's going to get some pace this time around. I think the price has to be right on him.
Yeah, and just kind of add to what you were saying, his 2 races after that Remsen, which I do think was a good effort. He had that 4-wide trip and kind of got there. Obviously couldn't sprint for home with Zandon and O'Donegal. They're superior animals, but I thought he ran deceptively well in those races. And what I will say about his Jerome and his Withers is that he was against track biases in both of those races. The speed bias on Jerome Day, and then the dead rail bias on Withers Day. He was too close to the inside, and horses that were anywhere near the rail on Withers Day just were, I mean, they had no chance. They lost by double-digit margins as he did. So I guess it wasn't a surprise that he took a step forward off those races. He took a big step forward, though, in that Tessio. It seemed like he was 2-5 to win that race at the 16th pole, yep. But Joe was just very game digging back down to the inside of him. He's got that exposed perfect trip, good race showing. So I wonder if he's, the right horse to take here, because he's a little bit of that last time you wanted to have him at 15-1. Maybe he's a shorter price today against the tougher field, but I agree. He's a horse that can definitely win this race. My idea is another horse that I think is going to be coming from off the pace, because I do see plenty of speed in here, a lot of stretch out sprinters. And for me, that horse is the number 9, Brooklyn Diamonds, a horse that actually began his career training with Bob Baffert in California. If you look up his work tab, when you can expand the all workouts in DRF Formulator, you'll see some workouts showing in California. He was training with some Bob Baffert horses over the winter, but I guess he didn't train satisfactorily because he was transferred to Rodolphe Brissett. Actually began his career in Maiden Claiming Company, but I like the way that he's finished off both of his races. He made that big run from the back of the pack to get up going the 6 furlong distance. And then last time out in the mud at Oaklawn, to me, it never looked like he really wanted to run through the kickback. He was just kind of spinning his wheels, and not until they got into the stretch and his rider was able to steer him into the clear did he kind of find his stride. And it looked for a minute like he wasn't even going to get up for second in that race, but in the final 16th, they kind of, jetted away from that horse. They ultimately finished third and was coming at the leader. I just like the way this horse always runs through the wire strongly, and he's got a nice pedigree despite the fact that they risked him for that maiden claiming tag first time out. I guess he was just maybe not a horse that performed in the morning, but he's definitely done better in the afternoons, and he's one that can come from off the pace, and I feel like he's going to get the right setup here. He's a little bit light on speed figures, so I'm hoping that we are going to get somewhere near that 10-1 morning line.
He's so lightly raced that he has the upside to maybe jump up on the speed figure scale very, very easily. You're right about his pedigree. His dam was a very classy horse. She was third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, won a few stakes races, of course, by Uncle Mo. And most importantly, the price is going to be right, friends. Brooklyn Diamonds, a horse to certainly consider in the Sir Barton, 10-1 on the morning line. We move to the Jim McKay Turf Sprint, race number 12 at $100,000 is the purse. A lot of money is going to go through Karotari, who's run fast races, is when he's best, one of the better turf sprinters out there. And there are concerns. He hasn't run since New Year's Eve. Supposedly he has been battling all sorts of foot problems. I think when he's right, he's probably the speed of the race. He's probably the horse to beat. The question is, do you want to take 9-5 on him?
Yeah, he's one of these horses that relishes really hard, firm ground. When he's gotten on that kind of going, he's looked like one of the best turf sprinters in the country, and he gets that at Gulfstream Park. And if you just kind of parse through his form and look at his Gulfstream races, he always runs big numbers down there. I believe he's also ran a big race over very firm going at Saratoga a couple of years ago, a track record performance. So this is a horse that has a lot of ability, and I think that the 5 furlongs is the right distance for him. But like you said, he kind of stands out in this race from a speed figure standpoint, and it feels like he's going to go off at a pretty short price in here. He's way the horse to beat for me, but coming off the layoff, just given the questions that you posed, I'm not sure that I want to have all of my play going through him. And I was looking through this race to find some horses that I could latch on to as backups. It was tough for me to do so because I can't say that I really see anybody that I can make on par with Karotari from an ability standpoint. But if Karotari takes a step backwards in this race, I think it opens things up a little bit. And I just kind of am partial to the number 7, Grateful Bread, who I know he's never run a speed figure that is anywhere near the kind of numbers that Karatari's running. But just watching this horse's races, he's so honest. He's so game. He tries hard every time. And this is a big step up in class for him. But he was facing a pretty good horse last time in True Valor, who was coming off a long layoff. But this is a horse that has graded stakes credentials from the past. And Grateful Bread took a really good shot at him. I mean, gave his usual hard try in that race. And he hasn't done this 5 furlong distance at Pimlico that much. But I think the 5 furlongs is really what this horse wants. He doesn't want to go much more than a step farther than that. So, assuming that he's a bigger price in this race than some other alternatives, he's the one that I would want to elevate a little bit, but acknowledging Karatari's way the horse to beat.
You certainly said a mouthful about Grateful Bread, and I agree with everything you said. He is a hard trier. He is a favorite in Maryland. And you're right about the King T. Leatherbury, his last start, because True Valor, yes, was coming off a lengthy layoff, but he happens to be trained by one of the great layoff trainers in the game in Graham Motion. And True Valor just got loose on the lead that day, and Motion afterwards said, hey, maybe we'll even take a shot at the Jaipur on Belmont Stakes Day. He liked that performance so much. And you're right, Grateful Bread didn't stop. He tried hard all the way down to the wire. I'm curious as to your thoughts on the number 5, Mr. Hustle. Now, Mr. Hustle was claimed by Mike Maker, and how many times have we seen this? Maker claims a horse, switches distances, switches surfaces, and soon they turn into stakes horses yet again. This horse was a multiple stakes winner early in his career. Last time out at Keeneland, they turned him all the way back into a sprint race. It looked like Tyler Gaffalione started to get him to run in between horses in mid-stretch, and he steadied in between horses. I don't know if he was going to win that race, but it looked like he was running. The winner of that race, 7 cents, not to take anything away from him, he got a perfect trip in that race.
Yeah, we saw that the same way. I'm not sure that Mr. Hustle was beating 7 Cents that day, but 7 Cents had everything go right for him. And Mr. Hustle just a little bit wider coming off the turn. They tried to angle him out, didn't get to go as wide as they wanted to, had to try to duck between horses. And that hole just closed up as he was trying to get through it. And a lot of horses, when that happens to them and they get their momentum stopped, they kind of aren't able to muster up a re-rally after that. But this horse actually tried to. When he was coming at the leaders late, actually closing basically just as fast as the runner at Bullseye Beauty as they came onto the wire. So I liked that this horse was able to kind of overcome that trouble to run as well as he did to be a close fifth in that race. Again, he's kind of like Grateful Bread. He's not a horse that has the speed figures or the past races that really put him on par with a horse like Karatari. But if Karatari doesn't show up, or if Karatari is softened up by a horse like Hollis, who's drawn on the outside and basically has to go from that post position and try to show speed in this race, maybe he's the closer that can come get them late.
Is Hollis an impossibility? He won this race a couple of years ago on rain-softened ground, and it seems like he does like a lot of cut in the ground when he races on turf. But there's one thing you notice when you look at his past performances. Anything under 6 furlongs, he just seems like a different animal. 6 furlongs is just sort of the magic stopping point for him, but he is getting a turn back in distance. He has run some fair races on the dirt this winter. Maybe if Karatari isn't 100%, there's a chance that Hollis leads this field, turning for home at a price again?
Yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical. I know he's got some big speed figures on dirt recently. His turf races in the past couple of years just haven't really measured up. As you said, that big turf win came over a boggy course a couple of years ago. So I'm not 100% convinced that he's quite as good on the turf as he is on the dirt. And also, while he's a very naturally fast horse, he's not always so fast those first few strides out of the gate. And sometimes he ends up getting a little more outrun than you might expect in these turf sprints that are run at such a fast pace in the opening quarter. So we'll see what we get from him in this race. I couldn't really make a case for him as a win candidate, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has an impact on this race because he does have a lot of early speed.
As a general handicapping opinion for the friends at home, a horse like Bank, the number one, he obviously is trained by Steve Asmussen, it's Joel Rosario, it's Top Connections. The horse has shown some ability in his career. Maybe you want a fresh face if you don't believe in the favorite. He is a half, I believe, to Brilliant Speed, who did his good work on synthetic, but also won a stakes race, a grade stakes race, I believe, in New York on the turf. What do you do with a horse like this? Do you just say, he's not for me, he's trying a new surface against a bunch of legitimate horses? Or is it always just the natural answer, let price be your guide?
Yeah, let price be your guide. Unlike with Joe in that earlier race, who's switching surfaces, who's going to take money based on superior dirt figures in a turf race, this horse doesn't have the speed figures that are going to attract a lot of support towards him. I think the only angle that will attract a lot of support is just merely the fact that Joel Rosario is riding him, and he's known as such a proficient turf sprint rider. He's got one of those pedigrees that can kind of go either way. You mentioned Brilliant Speed. He's also have to Super Speedy, who was more of a dirt horse. I think he's a sire up in Canada of like synth type runners. He's by Bernardini. Bernardini's not as poor a turf sire as I think he gets a reputation for being at times, but he is more of a dirt sire. So this horse is not for me, but I do think he's going to be a price in this race if you like him.
He's going to be a price in this race. He will have to work at a trip from the rail. He's got Joel. I think that I'm going to go with more of the preferred turf horses in this spot. Now we're going to move on to the Preakness. And before we get to the Preakness, we'll get to some business. Join DRF Bets today with promo code WINNING. Get started with a $250 deposit match bonus, $10 free bet, free access to Formulator past performances, easy sign up, drf.com/bet for more information. Okay, the Preakness is up next. Now, first of all, I want to talk about the Derby. Anyone that listened to the podcasts, of course, know some of the friends are new to DRF TV. They have not heard your take on it. Thoughts on Rich Strike's win in the Derby?
Got a fantastic ride, just a perfect storm of circumstances that allowed this horse to win the race. Sonny Leone just saved the ground, found the splits when he needed them, and got an insane pace up front. I mean, and I think it's worth pointing out about that Kentucky Derby pace. It was that opening quarter that was so suicidal. They really did moderate after that. They slowed down into the clubhouse turn and down the backstretch. But that opening quarter, sub 22, any horse that was within 3 lengths of that pace just had no chance to be around at the finish. And you did want to be as far back as possible. And other horses that were very far back in that race were coming at the end, horses like Barber Road and Mo Donegal, but they had to go really wide to make the runs, whereas Rich Strike was able to go up the inside. Rich Strike obviously not in this race. There are 3 horses coming out of the Kentucky Derby that are in here. And of them, and probably of all the horses in the Derby, I think it's pretty obvious that Epicenter ran the best race. He didn't run some historically great Derby, in my opinion. I think some people are kind of mistaking this for similar to the Congaree or Bodemeister Derbies when they were right up on those suicidal paces. He was not. Joel Rosario had this horse 5 or 6 lengths off of that really fast opening quarter, which I think is just a great testament to the clock in Joel Rosario's head that he was able to ride this horse that way. And I thought he gave this horse as perfect a ride as he could have for his running style, but he still probably got there earlier than you wanted to and held on for second. So he ran a fantastic race. I feel like his race is being slightly overrated by some.
I think you have a very good point there. I think Rosario gave him a fantastic ride. He was able to save ground behind that fast pace. He was able to hit all of the holes. The only maybe sticking point was I think he was very excited to follow Messier, figuring that Messier was going to take over and he would get outside of him. And when Messier kind of idled on the far turn, Epicenter had to wait a bit, but no problem. Epicenter eventually got to the front. I love the way he beat back Zandon's stretch drive before succumbing to Rich Strike. Now, you mentioned before that maybe you're not a proponent of the bounce theory all of the time, but it has to be in the back of your mind, especially with a horse that's going to go off at a very short price. Epicenter might regress off that race. He might still win if he regresses.
Yeah, I mean, aside from his debut, Epicenter's run well in basically all of his starts, and he's kind of been on this continuous upward trajectory. But as you're kind of getting at, trainers point for the Kentucky Derby and have their horses primed for their peak effort on that day. And sometimes the Preakness is a little bit of an afterthought, and you're just kind of hoping and praying that your horse is able to hold that form for the next 2 weeks moving into the Preakness. And if they get through that race and they're going for the Triple Crown, well, then you'll worry about the Belmont when you get there. But you really do try to have these horses peak for Derby day. So I don't think it's a given that Epicenter is going to run as well in the Derby. Sometimes these horses move forward, sometimes they move backwards. And I just feel like he could be in even money, maybe even odds-on territory in this race. And for me, that's just a little bit too short on him.
I think that's a very good point. He's 6-5 on the line. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes off at 4-5 in this race. I want to talk about the brilliant filly, the number 4 Secret Oath, because she certainly is brilliant. Maybe she doesn't have the figs that Epicenter has. She has one thing that I think none of these other horses has, and that's that push button acceleration, where when the jockey asks, the response is almost immediate and it's almost breathtaking. Again, maybe I'm just putting her on way too much of a pedestal. She has a lot of ability, and I think she's still even a little bit underrated after winning the Kentucky Oaks.
Yeah, she's got almost that like turf horse turn of foot in her, where she likes to be covered up in her races a little bit. You don't want to move too soon with her, but when she produces that kick, as you said, it is breathtaking. And that was the problem with her Arkansas Derby. They just kind of didn't make best use of it by pushing the button way too early, I think before they even got to the 3/8 pole. And clearly she had nothing left for the stretch drive after that. I'm not going to view that Arkansas Derby as some sign that she can't run against the males, because the trip that day just was totally wrong for a horse with her attributes. And last time out, Luis Saez made the proper adjustments and I thought rode her perfectly to win that Kentucky Oaks. My question is, how strong was that Oaks compared to the 3 colts that are going to take money in this race in their last races? To me, it was not as good as Epicenter's Derby. She was much the best in the Oaks, but I thought that she got the perfect trip that day. I thought that she probably ran the best that she was capable of running at the time. And I'm just not sure that it's quite good enough to get her over the hump in this Preakness, because I do think she's got to take another slight step forward on the speed figure scale.
And I think there's a slight chance she might go off the second choice in this race based on her reputation. Early voting, the number 5 is the most likely speed horse in this race. He's a cantankerous son of gun runner. I got to look at him schooling today, and he was his usual bad boy self, which doesn't bother me because that's him. The Wood Memorial, his last race. First of all, let's talk about the Withers, a race over a muddy track where maybe it wasn't the greatest field in the world. No disrespect to an Oho who came back to shock the rebel, but he went fast early. And he kept right on rolling in the stretch. And I think that showed that early voting had a lot of ability.
I agree. That Wood Memorial was a nice race from him. Mo Donegal, who beat him, saved every bit of ground to run him down. I guess the one thing I would say about the Wood that maybe is a problem that I have with early voting in this race is that the pace was not that fast. It was a moderate, pretty even pace throughout. Aside from O'Donegal, it was not a race where anybody really changed position at all. So I did think coming out of that race that O'Donegal ran the better race than early voting. Obviously, O'Donegal's not in here, but kind of a similar situation to what I was talking about with Sacred Oath. If you think that wood is good enough to make him the Preakness winner, then have at it. But I feel like he ran his best race he was capable of in the wood. But I believe he's going to have to take another step forward to beat this field. I know some people have the wood as a faster race. Timeform US, Craig, who does our speed figures, I mean, he had the wood as, I think, the fastest final round prep after the Santa Anita Derby. So, I mean, if you believe that number, that makes him right on par with Epicenter. I think early voting is going to have to take another slight step forward. I do think it's possible, because he's trained really well coming out of that race. And I know Chad Brown is really looking forward to this, regards this horse with a lot of confidence. I'm just, at the price that he's going to be, I had trouble making him fair value for me either. And that's kind of the problem with this Preakness is I have trouble finding the right value on a lot of horses that are considered the top contenders.
Do you see him loose in this race? Or do you think a horse like the recent winner Armagnac will try to push him earlier if Armagnac is even fast enough or classy enough to stay with him for very long? We know Epicenter has the tactical speed to do anything. So maybe that point is just moot, that Epicenter will be sitting third on the outside no matter who is on the lead, or maybe even sitting second, putting the heat on early voting.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Chad Brown in some quotes this week saying that early voting can stalk, and he would be happy to see him stalking in this race. I don't know if that's just trainer speaks trying to, basically deceive the other riders in this race. I don't know what's going on with that, but I would expect him to be sent to the front end just based on the races that he's run previous to this. I think he's a naturally faster horse than Armagnac. We were talking about that Withers a little bit, and I know the pace doesn't look that fast based on raw fractions, but that was a dead track at Aqueduct, and he just rocketed out of the gate. And early voting has just this fantastic start reaction time where he gets out of the gate very quickly. So I think the lead is there for the taking if he wants it. I'm not really viewing Armagnac as a horse that's quick enough to put up that much pressure. I know that Fenwick's connections are talking about riding him aggressively. I don't see him being nearly fast enough to be a major pace presence in this race. So early voting is supposed to get the right trip here. To me, it's just a matter of whether or not he's good enough.
Now, we talked about the winner, Rich Strike of the Kentucky Derby, getting a very good trip. I thought Simplification got a great ride from Jose Ortiz. Everything went right for him. The pace was fast. There was not a straw in his path. He had a big look at it, David, turning into the stretch. And I'm fine with saying he wasn't good enough on that day. Maybe that's the best he can run. It's pretty good. And he's a versatile horse. He's shown that he can win from on the lead or from off the pace. I'm sure Johnny Velasquez will find a good spot with him. I've never been a huge fan of his. The Derby, I think, is the best he can do, and I think he needs to do a little better.
Yeah, I get that viewpoint with him. I agree with you about the Derby trip. I thought that Jose Ortiz gave him a masterful ride. He really maximized this horse's potential. And I think he made use of the versatility that Simplification has, because he's a horse that was kind of a speedball early in his career. But, the one poor start in the Holy Bull, and they realized they could change things up. And they've used that in subsequent races, that knowledge that he can come from off the pace. And, I got a question from on Twitter about why he was shown so far back on the pace projector. I think he's last or second to last on the pace projector, and it's because it's based on a horse's recent races, and they've elected to ride this horse as a closer in 3 of his last 4 races because he can do it. He has the option to show more speed, but it hasn't been the wisest choice in the races that he's been in, and that was the case in the Kentucky Derby. He did get a little bit sandwiched between horses coming out of the gate, but you could see Jose Ortiz was leaning back in the saddle. His intention was not to be up close to that pace. He was trying to get him far back, and he produced the kick in the stretch. He just kind of petered out towards the end, wasn't able to continue on with some of the other deep closers that were coming after him. He ran really well to be fourth. I ended up picking Simplification in this race, though, kind of because trying to figure out what prices the horses are going to be and what I view fair odds on them to be. He was the one horse on my value line that was in line with what I thought would be fair odds. I think he's going to drift up a little bit from that 6-1 morning line to maybe be about 8-1. And on the off chance that Epicenter does regress, I view Simplification on his prior races as having similar credentials to horses like Early Voting and Secret Oath, and I think he's going to be the best price of those. And I also, in a race that does not have nearly as much pace as the Derby. I think John Velasquez is going to get more aggressive with this horse than we might have seen in the Derby because he's got that versatility. He gives his connections the option to do so. And I'm just kind of encouraged that his connections of all of those coming out of the Derby seemed the most confident and the most, excited about the way their horse came out of the race coming into this Preakness, holding his weight and his condition well. So I feel like he's going to run well in this race, and maybe that's going to be good enough to win at what I think is going to be a fair enough price.
I agree with you that he's going to drift up, and boy, his connections couldn't wait to get here. They were on the grounds early to get simplification acclimated. He seems to be doing very, very well. And again, about the Timeform US Pace Projector to the folks at home, it's handicapable. You don't have to take it as gospel. You can look at the past performances and see exactly what David's talking about. This horse was a speed horse early in his career. The stumbling start, the missed break in the Holy Bull changed things. It gave him options. They've used the options. That doesn't mean he doesn't have an option to be close to the pace on Saturday. I think he'll be a lot closer. Creative Minister is a horse that I don't know if he's a wise guy horse, but I have a feeling that people looking for an alternative are going to say, well, okay, I don't love the horses coming out of the preps, or I think Epicenter is going to be too short of a price and bounce. This horse has won his last 2 races. They put up the big money to supplement. He's lightly raced enough where I guess he can show improvement. I don't know. I think he's 10-1 in the morning line. To me, that's just light.
I agree. He's never faced a field like this before. He definitely is a horse that has ability. He showed that last time. I liked the way he won that allowance race. He traveled into it pretty sweetly and finished it off nicely. I think better than he had in his prior races, but it's just asking so much of him. And, that race came up pretty fast on raw times. I was talking to Craig Milkowski, who makes the Timeform US numbers, about the difficulties of making speed figures on Kentucky Derby Day. And it did feel like a day where the track slowed down a little bit later in the day, especially for certain races later in the day, some of the one-turn races. And, just on the surface of things, comparing the time of his race to some later races in the day, it seems very fast. But I'm skeptical that those horses ran as fast as the raw time would indicate. I think the buyer is pretty much right. The Craig's number was very similar to the buyer, and it just doesn't make him fast enough to really be considered a major player in this race. I like him for down the line, just not in this race.
I want to talk a little bit about Skippy Longstocking at a giant price, who is 3rd in the Wood. I'm not sure he's good enough to win this race. I doubt it, but I wonder if maybe you could make a case for him on the lower rungs of your exotics. Looking at the Wood, you'll remember that early voting and Mo Donegal basically were rail skimmers all the way around. Skippy Longstocking at least went outside and made up some ground. Do you give him any extra points for that?
That was he's kind of the reason why I couldn't bring myself to pick early voting in this race, because I felt like I had to have this horse somewhere in my picks too if I was picking early voting, because I agree, he covered all the ground in the Wood. I mean, if you factor in ground loss, he probably ran just as fast a race as early voting did. And you kind of wonder where it came from. I mean, he is a horse that has clearly improved with added distance. He showed that too back in that allowance win at Gulfstream Park when he got that wicked pace to close into. But you do kind of wonder if that maybe the Wood is a little dressed up because he got that big figure. I will say I've watched some of the training videos online that Maryland Racing has been putting out, and this horse could not look any better in the morning. He really creates a picture on the track. I don't know if that means something to everybody, but he strikes me as the one horse that's probably going to be in the 15-1 plus range that might be able to outrun his odds in this race.
And we briefly touched upon Armagnac when discussing the pace. He is coming off of a win, which was by far the fastest win of his career. He couldn't have had an easier trip. He got to the lead and he beat some questionable competition. I'm assuming they're going to try to send him to get close to the pace. Is he good enough?
I don't think so. He has the right running style for those short fields at Santa Anita. When you get out to the front, it seems like speed sometimes gets carried in those races, and that's when he's been most successful. He faced the big boys in the San Felipe and the Santa Anita Derby, and it didn't work out either time. He didn't have the speed to make the front in those races, albeit facing a very fast horse like Forbidden Kingdom. But early voting is a very fast horse too, arguably just as fast as Forbidden Kingdom on pace figures. So I don't view Armagnac as one that's going to get to the front, and I think if he doesn't, he's going to be in trouble.
And I think we'd both agree that both Happy Jack and Fenwick would be shockers if they were to win this race. So we'll move on and we'll get to your questions in a minute. Just want to remind everybody again, drf.com/bet. Sign up for DRF bets, get a $250 deposit match bonus, $10 free bet, and free access to Formulator past performances. Our social media guru, Emily Shields, I'm sure has questions lined up and ready to go from all the folks. Obviously, PPs are important, But what other observations are factored into your consideration? David, I think I know where you're going to go with this, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the kind of race, but in general, I like to watch some workout videos when they're available, especially for races with younger horses, some of the maiden races, which we're not talking about for this particular sequence, but watching workouts and how horses are training coming into races or their debuts or races where they don't have a lot of experience can be really instructive to how they're doing and whether or not they're going to improve or regress or they're ready to fire first time out. So that's the tool that I probably make the most use of, just spending time watching some workout videos when they are available.
Now, what do you look for when you're watching these videos? A lot of times at home, the folks aren't going to have access to, let's say, a regular maiden at Saratoga unless they sold it a 2-year-old in training sale. And I think a very important tool that those 2-year-old in training sales give out, they give out those breezes, those 2 furlong breezes. What do you look for, especially in a young horse?
Yeah, for the 2-year-old sales breezes, contrary to like when you're watching a typical workout, I don't pay so much attention to what the rider's doing in those 2-year-old sales workouts. I just kind of assume that whoever is on that horse's back is as light as possible and doing everything they can in their power to get that horse to run as fast as possible. No one's holding back in those workouts. So I don't really care if the rider is pushing hard or whipping or what. I kind of disregard that. I try to look at how the horse is moving, especially with regard to whether they're running on the dirt or the turf. I try to pay attention to whether they have that kind of lopey stride to them or a high knee action or something like that you might consider with more of a turfy look, especially with those synthetic workouts. Sometimes you'll see that. Or if a horse has like a really quick, choppy action, sometimes more of a dirt type. And also, I just look at the horse's pedigree, kind of what I know about how horses are supposed to look and whether they're taking after those sires. Like if you ever have seen Progeny of Uncle Mo, he really stamps his progeny with that big loping action that he had. I like to look for that. The Into Mischiefs, they're all stamped with that very distinctive physical appearance. So I like to just see how the horses are built and how they're moving in those workouts, as opposed to like how the horses are training on the racetrack coming up to their starts. If you can view, their last workout on a tool like XBTV, which is available for people to Google or to find on that website. I like to look to how the jockey's moving or the exercise rider, whether they're being asked for a lot, whether they're being held back, if they're listening to the jockey's cues, if they're getting rank under the jockey, staying with their company, who the company is. I like to pay attention to all of that stuff.
How important are company workouts to you and the quality of the competition that a horse is working with?
I think it means different things for different barns. For a trainer like Chad Brown, if he's working a first-time starter with a stakes horse, that usually is saying that this horse has outworked the other horses that are in her class, and she's going to be he has to pair with a much tougher rival to keep those horses in company. Because if you've watched a lot of Chad Brown workouts, his workouts, I should say, are very well choreographed in the morning, where the horses always stay together. They have similar ability, and they typically try to achieve similar times. Whereas sometimes you'll see other trainers try to use horses as targets. Some break off ahead of others and try to pass them, and sometimes they'll intentionally pair an inferior horse with a better horse to create that target. So I think it really depends on paying attention to what that trainer typically does and what the intention is.
You, of course, are the host of Horses to Watch every Wednesday on DRF TV. Trip has to be a very important, handicapping tool in the box.
Oh, totally. I guess Trip didn't come to mind because it's it's just PPs are synonymous with Trips these days, them being a digital resource, and in Formulator and Timeform US, it's so easy to pull up those replays. But yeah, I watch. That's most of my handicapping is watching Trips, just seeing how the horses achieved the results that they did in the recent races, and whether or not they're going to get those similar trips on this situation. If they had a poor trip, are they going to be able to do better here? So Trip handicapping, it's a piece of the puzzle, but I feel like it's a really important piece because it gives you a clue into how the horse achieved the results that they did.
Now, here's a question that I guess old school handicappers might think differently than some of the new age ones. Class. How does class factor into your handicapping?
Yeah, it's kind of funny how class has kind of been demoted a little bit in the hierarchy of important handicapping factors, especially with the rise of speed figures, when it seems like bettors base so much of their opinion on who is the fastest, because especially with the buyer speed figures, the numbers are so widely available to these days to anybody who's using the DRFPP is that, they move the board a lot more than they did probably 30 or 40 years ago. And class has been a little bit devalued. I still think it's pretty important, especially when you're watching those trips. Sometimes if a horse is coming out of tougher races at a higher level. Not that the horses looks around him and says, oh, these horses are better than me, but sometimes it's just a more difficult race for the horse to get the trip that it needs to be successful, or sometimes in the softer races, a horse is more likely to work out the easier trips. So I like to pay attention to class for that reason, to see if there was some reason against the tougher fields that a horse maybe wasn't able to run to its true potential. So I think class is definitely worth paying attention to when you're coupling it with the speed figures to see how fast the horse is running.
And of course, pace, very important. And Timeform US's pace projector is a wonderful, wonderful handicapping tool with your red bar, blue bar scenarios. I like to compare them with how these horses have fared in prior races. You might have a horse that was cooked on a red pace. Now he's loose on a blue or be very rare gray. And all of a sudden that bad running line doesn't look so bad.
Yeah, and as you were saying, pace projector, it's not saying, this is exactly how the race is going to be run, but it's based on the data, and it's really good data that Timeform US speed figure maker Craig Mulkowski spends a lot of time homing and making sure he gets right those pace figures. And it's just basically saying to you, this is how fast this horse has shown himself capable of running in his recent races. That's not to say that the horse isn't going to be ridden differently on this specific occasion, but it's basically giving you a really good window into how this horse has done recently and how the connections have ridden that horse in recent races. So I think the pace projector is a really important tool to kind of just give a sense of how our pace is going to shake out. And it allows you to kind of build your own pace handicapping opinions off of that. And you can try to kind of, move chicklets around in your head to figure out, if you think a horse is going to be more forward or backwards. But sometimes, it's with a 12 horse field and a lot of horses with similar running styles, it can really clear things up to see, okay, this horse is clearly the fastest.
All right, next question out of the magic bag. Do you add an extra handicap against fillies' Secret Oath when they face the boys? Interesting question.
Personally, I don't. They get a weight allowance if that matters to you. It's just, I think it's 5 pounds in the Preakness. 5 pounds isn't nothing. Some people would say it's as much of as a length or more. But just with regard to whether fillies can compete against males and run as well, I think the answer generally on average is yes. I haven't looked at a large amount of data for this, but I just know, kind of watching racing from other places on the globe, in Japan, in Europe, France, England, fillies run against males all the time at a variety of class levels on different surfaces, and typically do quite well. They run to their form. So, unless it's a specific situation with a horse that, is not physically matching up to her competition, and that's maybe a concern that she's going to get intimidated, I don't really view that as something that's particularly common with females facing males. And with regard to Secret Oath in particular, she's not some short thing. She's got the physical stature to match up with the males in this race. So I'm not too worried about that.
I agree with you 100%. How many times have we seen Wesley Ward debut a filly against the boys at Keeneland and run off and win by 15? I think you see that a lot more, maybe with younger horses here in the United States, but certainly worldwide, the fillies can hold their own with the boys. I don't add any handicap against them. Next question, please. If Secret Oath had won that Arkansas Derby, would she be favored here over Epicenter? Well, I think if Secret Oath had won that Arkansas Derby, she would have run in the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, that was my reaction too. I guess that would have been a possibility. It's possible she might have done well in the Kentucky Derby. That pace shook out. Who knows? She had better looking PPs coming into that race than Rich Strike for sure. That's a big hypothetical. I don't really know. But the fact of the matter is, I think she ran a winning race in the Arkansas Derby regardless of trip. So you're probably getting a better price on her than you otherwise would have if she had won that race.
I'm considering that Secret Oath was not favored in the Kentucky Oaks, despite the fact she ran so well in the Arkansas Derby. And I would say Epicenter will probably be slightly favored, if not even more than slightly favored. The talk is always about the 2-week turnaround, but Armagnac only gets 13 days in a longer ship. Does an extra day of rest make a difference? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. 2 weeks, give or take a day. I think it's generally not considered ideal in this day and age in racing, but Barnes will do it when the reward is great enough, and that's certainly the case in this Preakness. So I think a lot of these trainers, it's not the plan to come back in 2 weeks. You're hoping to just get to a race like this, but you're just hoping that your horse can maintain their condition over that 2-week period, because you're not doing a whole lot with them during that time between the races.
And I guess in situations where maybe it's not the Preakness or the Belmont, this is a case where you can really parse through the trainer statistics and DRF formulator, because there are some guys, maybe even on the lower levels, they like to wheel horses back in a week. And you would think that's a horrible handicapping angle, but not for certain trainers. So I think maybe that's something that could help you out with your handicapping there. Trainer statistics on short rest, especially with shipping. You can do anything with formulator PPs. Next question. Is there any concern about creative ministers stepping up in distance for the first time? That's a good question.
Yeah, this horse strikes me as one that's not going to have problems with distance. A mile and 3/16 in just her fourth career start, I guess, is asking a lot. But I think it's the step up in company that's asking a lot for this horse, not so much the distance. Pedigree-wise, he's certainly bred to, get the classic distances. I think his best half sibling is a horse named Battalion Runner, who was second in the Wood Memorial, like maybe 5 years ago or so. But the creative causes, his sire, they can go the classic distances. So I'm not too concerned about it with him. I'm more concerned about the horses that he's facing.
Yeah, I agree. I think he is certainly bred. This dam did throw Battalion Runner, a couple of other quality horses as well, going 2 turns. I think a mile and 3/16 will be just fine. It's, whether he's good enough stepping up in class. And hey, he's wheeling back on 2 weeks as well. Our next question. Terry Gonzalez asks, and thank you, Terry, for the question and for watching. Does Happy Jack or Fenwick have any chance to hit the board? I personally don't think so, but I was wrong 2 weeks ago.
I don't think so either, but I will say I think Happy Jack has a stakes with his name written on it sometime later in the year, because this horse is a hard trier, and I like Happy Jack quite a bit as a racehorse. I just don't think they're running him in the right races right now. But I think if he's not ruined by this tough schedule, Happy Jack will have some improvement in him down the line.
My concern is that recently he just hasn't broken from the gate. That's a major concern in a race like this. I want to see him get out. They're going to try blinkers again. I think you make a good point. I think he does have a race in him. I think it might be one of the lesser derbies, maybe in the summer or fall. But Terry, I think Happy Jack or Fenwick, boy, they're really going to have to step up their game. Next question. Carol asks, do you think Rosario may have moved too soon, riding the horse from the half-mile pole?
No, and you make her. That's actually some very good trip watching to notice that, because Joel did move his hands a little bit, leaving the backstretch on this horse. And I think what he was doing at that point in the Derby is just trying to make sure he was going to avoid the horses stopping in his face, and know that he was following the right horse coming around the far turn, because you didn't want to get stuck behind Summer is Tomorrow when that horse stopped on the far turn. So I think he was using this horse just enough to make sure that he was in the pocket when he had to produce him. So I think, for me, that moving of his hands a little bit to get into that position it could have been the winning move if he had actually won the Derby. It didn't quite work out. He got run down at the end, but I thought he gave just a masterful ride on this horse in the Kentucky Derby.
I agree with everything you said. I think he had to move at that point to avoid the eventual, and those horses were certainly going to tire those speed horses after that enervating pace. I think he had hoped Messier would maybe give him some cover into the turn a little more, but no. I think he rode the horse perfectly. Carol, thanks for the question. Rob Ferg asks, is rest an issue? Horses with the most rest between races, like early voting, Skippy, and Fenwick, having the most rest.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking specifically at the Preakness, going back 25 years, you would say rest is a bad thing, because typically, horses coming back off the Kentucky Derby were the ones that were successful in the Preakness with that 2-week turnaround. But in recent years, we've seen some of the new shooters be more successful. I think in the past decade, there have been, I want to say, 4 or 5 of them that have won the Preakness. So maybe the trends are shifting as horses race less these days, but I don't think it's a bad thing.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. The game's changed. I mean, David, you're a lot younger than I am, and a lot smarter, by the way. But also, I remember when horses ran every month. The classy handicap horses. And while I kind of long for those days, it's a different world now. You don't see horses run back. So you see the trainers like Todd. Todd never runs his horses back in 2 weeks off the Derby. I think he hates doing it when he has the Derby winner, and he hasn't been successful there. So I don't really handicap that way. I'm not going to really focus more on rest in the Preakness. One more question left before we conclude. Who is your best bet from the Preakness undercard? David, I'll let you go first.
Well, a quickly review here. Okay, I would say Brooklyn Diamonds in that Sir Barton. When I say best bet, I like to look for a horse that I think is going to be value or sufficient value for me, and I feel like he's going to be a decent price in that race. It's the right kind of pace setup, and just watching his races, I think he's a horse that has some improvement in him. So that'd be the one for me.
From a value standpoint, I want to bet Beacon Hill. I want to bet Mr. Jefferson. Those are 2 horses that I'm interested in. I'm also very curious. I don't think the price will be there. I really wonder if Disco Pharaoh, a horse that we're familiar with from New York, can take that requisite step forward, turning back to 6 furlongs. I know you haven't exactly finished your handicapping for that race. Does a turn back with that horse worry you a little bit?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit surprised. He strikes me as one that they would have wanted to concentrate on or make the goal races going about like a mile, a one-turn mile. But I guess the races that come up are the races that come up, and you want to run in them if the horse is doing well. He's a horse with a lot of talent. I was impressed with that, 20-length maiden victory at Aqueduct, and I watched his last race at Laurel. He looked good. I'm not going to be surprised when this horse turns out to be okay, but he's got to continue taking those steps forward against tougher company.
Well, we thank everybody for watching. We especially thank you for your questions. Bet the Preakness with DRF bets, free formulator past performances, $10 free bet, $250 deposit match. All you have to do is use the promo code WINNING at drf.com/bet. David, it was a real pleasure and honor to work with you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for watching the DRF webinar for the Preakness. Enjoy the race.